3 days before my college graduation ceremony, my mother called me to say she wouldn't be coming. Not because she was sick, not because of a flight emergency or a family crisis. She called me at 9:47 on a Tuesday night, and the first thing she said was, "I need you to understand that this isn't about you." Those words, "I need you to understand that this isn't about you." I had heard that sentence so many times growing up that I could predict exactly which pause came before it and which justification came after. And even at 26, standing in my tiny apartment kitchen with a half-eaten bowl of cereal on the counter and my graduation gown still in the plastic bag on the floor, I felt 12 years old again. She said my stepfather had booked a cruise months ago. She said it would be too expensive to cancel. She said I should be proud of myself, regardless of who was in the audience. She said a lot of things in a tone that sounded like she was reading from a script she had rehearsed, and I listened to all of it without saying a word, because I had learned a long time ago that arguing with her on the phone only made the silence afterward worse. When she finished, I said, "Okay." She said, "You're not upset, are you?" I said, "I'll talk to you later," and I hung up. I sat down on the kitchen floor, which sounds dramatic, but the chair was too far away, and my legs just stopped working for a second. I sat there with my back against the cabinet and looked at the graduation gown in its bag and thought about the 7 years it had taken me to get to this point. 7 years, because I had worked 2 jobs through most of my undergrad, dropped to part-time enrollment twice when the money ran out, transferred schools once, and then spent 3 additional years in a master's program that I had funded almost entirely on my own through a combination of teaching assistantships, academic scholarships, and one very humbling period where I sold plasma twice a week at a clinic on Fletcher Avenue. My mother had contributed exactly one thing to my education: a single $500 check when I started my freshman year, which she handed to me with the energy of someone expecting a monument erected in their honor. My stepfather had contributed his opinion that I was pursuing a degree in something impractical and would regret it. My half-brother, who was 4 years younger than me and had received a full ride to a private university that my mother and stepfather had spent years fundraising, volunteering, and emotionally investing in. He had never once asked me how school was going. Not once in 7 years. That was the shape of my family. Let me back up. My parents divorced when I was 6. My father moved to Portland and remarried a woman named Jean, and they built a quiet life up there that I visited every summer until I was about 14, and the visits started feeling like I was intruding on something that had formed without me. I don't say that with bitterness toward my father. He's not a bad man, he's just a man who started over, and starting over leaves less room for the things that came before. My mother remarried when I was 8. My stepfather was an engineer, decent income, very opinionated, and almost pathologically uninterested in me. He had a son from his first marriage, my half-brother Callum, and from the moment Callum moved in with us when I was 10, the household reorganized itself around him the way a solar system reorganizes around the largest mass. My mother, who had always been emotionally inconsistent with me, became suddenly very warm and very focused on him. I watched it happen slowly enough that I kept thinking I was imagining it. The way she would rush to his side effects at every school event but show up late to mine or not at all. The way dinner conversation pivoted to his activities. The way college planning became this enormous family project when Callum was a junior in high school, with spreadsheets and campus tours and a college counselor they hired out of pocket. While my own college plans were met with a brochure my mother left on my bed with no conversation attached. I want to be careful here because I know how this sounds. I know it sounds like jealousy, and maybe some of it was, but there is a specific kind of pain that comes from watching someone give to another child everything they withheld from you, and it is not jealousy exactly. It is more like confirmation. It confirms a suspicion you have been trying not to have. It confirms that the scarcity was not actually about resources. It was about you specifically. I left for college at 18 with a used laptop, a Pell Grant, a part-time job lined up at a campus coffee shop, and the $500 check. I called my mother every Sunday for the first 2 years. She answered about half the time. I want to tell you that I grew up and got over it and became a person unbothered by any of this, because that would be a cleaner story. But the truth is that I carried it with me in the way you carry something you don't realize is heavy until you set it down. I was 23 before I understood that the anxiety I felt before calling my mother was not normal. 24 before a therapist gently named what had been happening in my household for 15 years. 25 before I stopped apologizing for things that were not my fault. And 26, standing in a cap and gown, holding tickets to my own graduation that I had earned without a single tuition dollar from the people who were supposed to care. I had 6 tickets total. I gave one to my father, who flew down from Portland and told me, with a kind of quiet pride that made me want to cry, that he would not have missed it. I gave one to my roommate from sophomore year, Willa, who had witnessed the most exhausting chapters of this story and who showed up with gas station flowers because she said fancy flowers were performative. I gave one to my thesis advisor, Dr. Chen, who had fought for my funding more than once and who I genuinely owed a debt that could not be repaid. I gave one to my boyfriend, Mitch, who had been with me for 2 years and who had once driven 4 hours to sit with me in a parking lot when I got a rejection letter and couldn't stop shaking. And I had left 2 tickets for my mother and stepfather because I was still that person, even then, still holding space for them. She called on that Tuesday night and removed herself from that space, and I sat on the kitchen floor and stared at the bag with the gown in it, and then I picked up my phone and texted Willa. She called me back in 40 seconds. She listened to the whole thing, and when I finished, she said, "Okay, so who gets the ticket?" That was Willa. She didn't offer sympathy first because she knew I didn't need sympathy. She knew I needed forward motion. I thought about it, and then I thought about a woman I had met 8 months earlier through Dr. Chen at a symposium on urban policy that had nothing to do with my thesis, but that I had attended because Dr. Chen told me to go meet people and stop hiding in the library. Her name was Bernadette. She was 63 years old, a retired city planner, and she had spent about 45 minutes at that symposium talking to me like I was a colleague rather than a student, asking about my research with genuine curiosity, and then, at the end of the conversation, pressing her business card into my hand and saying, "Don't lose this. I think you're going somewhere." I had emailed her twice since then. She had responded to both emails with the kind of thoughtful reply that takes time to write. She had read my published thesis excerpt when I sent it. She had sent back 3 paragraphs of specific, intelligent feedback. She was not my family. She had known me for less than a year. But she had shown up for my work in a way that my actual family never had, and something in me, maybe the part that had finally started trusting its own instincts, said her name before I could second-guess it. I texted her the next morning. I explained that I had an extra ticket to my graduation and that I would understand completely if she couldn't make it, and there was no obligation whatsoever. She replied 11 minutes later, "I would be honored. Tell me what time and where to park." I read that text 3 times. Graduation morning arrived the way big mornings always do, too fast and then suddenly very slow. I was in the staging area with the rest of the master's candidates, all of us in identical black robes and feeling equal parts proud and absurd, when my phone buzzed with a text from Callum. "Mom said you're upset about the cruise. Don't make this into a big thing." I stared at that text for a long moment. Don't make this into a big thing. As if my graduation were the big thing. As if the 7 years were the big thing. As if I were creating a problem by having a reaction to being told, 3 days out, that my mother had chosen a vacation. I turned my phone face down and put it in my robe pocket. The ceremony was held in the university's outdoor amphitheater, which seated about 4,000 people and which had the particular acoustic quality of making everything sound slightly more important than it probably was. I was in the 3rd row of candidates. When they opened the doors and the procession began, I walked out into that space and the noise of the crowd washed over me and I had to press my lips together very hard to keep my face from doing something embarrassing. I found my people in the crowd about halfway through the procession. Mitch spotted me first and stood up and waved with both arms, which was embarrassing and also the best thing I had seen all week. Willa whistled. My father held up a sign, an actual poster board sign, the kind you make with a marker, that said my name on it, and I laughed out loud even though I was supposed to be walking solemnly. And then I saw Bernadette. She was seated next to my father, which meant they had apparently introduced themselves because they were both watching me come down the aisle, and they both looked, I don't know, they looked like people who were proud, not the polite, distant pride of obligation. The real kind. The kind that takes up space on a person's face. I had not expected it to hit me that hard. But there is something about being witnessed by the right people, at the right moment that breaks something open in you, something you did not realize was sealed shut. I had spent so long needing acknowledgement from people who gave it conditionally or not at all, and here was a woman who had known me for 8 months, sitting in a folding chair in an amphitheater on a Tuesday morning, because I had asked and she had come. When they called my name and I crossed the stage, I heard Willa's whistle and Mitch cheering and my father making a sound I can only describe as a sustained expression of relief. And I heard, cutting through all of it, Bernadette's voice, clear and certain and aimed directly at me, saying, "There she is." Just that. There she is. I shook the dean's hand and accepted my diploma and walked back to my seat, and I was crying before I got there. Not the sad kind. The kind that happens when something is finally irrevocably real. The luncheon was at a restaurant near campus that Mitch had booked weeks earlier. Dr. Chen joined us. There were 6 of us around a table meant for 8, and the 2 empty chairs were not mentioned by anyone, which was its own kind of grace. At some point during the meal, Bernadette turned to my father and said something I wasn't meant to hear, but the table was small enough that I caught it anyway. She said, "You raised someone remarkable." My father looked startled for a moment, the way people do when they're given credit for something they feel only partially deserves it. And then he looked at me and he said quietly, "I didn't do enough, but she did it anyway." I looked down at my plate. After lunch, when we were standing in the parking lot and people were drifting toward their cars, Bernadette held both my hands and looked at me with the particular directness that I had come to understand was just how she was. No performance, no softening, just the actual thing. She said, "What's next for you?" I had a job offer pending at a regional planning consultancy. I told her about it. She asked 3 specific questions about the firm, nodded at the answers, and then said, "You should take it, and in 2 years, when you've outgrown it, call me." I laughed. 2 years? Maybe 18 months, she said, like she was genuinely reassessing. "You're faster than you think." My mother texted me that evening, a brief message. "Congratulations, honey. Hope it was a special day." I looked at it for a long time. The old version of me would have responded immediately, would have made her comfortable, would have smoothed over the gap between what I needed and what she gave. I had spent 26 years being the person who did that work, who reached across the distance and made up the difference with my own effort so that the relationship could continue without her ever having to change. I set the phone down. I did not respond that night. I did not respond the next day either. Callum called that weekend. He did not ask about the ceremony. He said my mother was upset that I hadn't replied to her text and that I was making things weird, and I listened to him tell me, in his 22-year-old voice, that I was being difficult, and when he finished I said, "I love you. I'm going to call you back sometime when we can talk about something else." And I hung up. What happened over the next several months is harder to describe because it was not dramatic, it was quiet, it was the absence of effort on my part, and the discovery of what remained when I stopped providing it. My mother called less when I didn't call back. When she did call, the conversations were shorter without my labor to extend them. She told me once that I had changed. Said it the way people say it when they mean you used to be more convenient. I said I probably had and asked if she wanted to talk about anything specific. She didn't. My stepfather had never called me independently and did not start. Callum and I had 3 more conversations that year, all of them surface level, all of them ending in the same place, him nudging me toward my mother, me declining to go. Meanwhile, other things were happening. I took the job. Bernadette was right about it. It was the right move. I was good at it, and I grew fast, and within 14 months I had been given my first lead role on a city rezoning project that had a $40 million budget and stakeholders who were not shy about their opinions. I called Bernadette when that happened. She said, "I told you 18 months. You did it in 14. Overachiever." Mitch and I got engaged on a Thursday night in our apartment with no ring yet because we had agreed to pick one together, which I know sounds unromantic but was actually exactly right for us. He got down on one knee in the kitchen next to the same counter where I had stood 2 years earlier listening to my mother on the phone, and he said, "I have watched you become exactly who you were supposed to be, and I want to be there for all of it." I said yes so fast he barely finished the sentence. We set a wedding date 14 months out. I spent a long time thinking about the guest list. More specifically, I spent a long time thinking about one line of that guest list, the family section. My father, yes. Jean, yes. She had made real effort over the past few years, and I had started to appreciate her in a way I hadn't when I was younger. My mother, my stepfather, Callum, I went back and forth. I talked to Mitch about it, and to my therapist, and to Willa, who gave me the least filtered take of anyone, and told me to trust my gut and stop performing grace for an audience that wasn't even watching. I sent the invitations. I included my mother, stepfather, and Callum, and then I waited. My mother called 3 days after the invitations arrived. She said she was thrilled. She said the date worked. She said she wanted to be involved. She asked about the venue, the colors, the dress. She sounded like a mother who had always been present, which was a version of her that I had learned to receive with a certain careful distance. The way you warm your hands near a fire without getting close enough to burn. 2 months before the wedding, she called again. She started the conversation the way she sometimes did when she was nervous, talking about something else entirely for several minutes before arriving at the actual point. She talked about Callum's new apartment, about a problem with the neighbor's tree, about a recipe she had tried. And then she said, "I need to talk to you about something." I said, "Okay." She said, "Your stepfather and I have been talking, and, well, Callum has been going through a hard time financially, and we've been thinking about the wedding gift we had planned for you, and whether it might be more practical to redirect some of it toward helping him get back on his feet. And I want you to understand that it doesn't mean we aren't proud of you, it just means." I stopped her. Not loudly, not emotionally. I just said, "Mom, stop." She stopped. I said, "You were going to give us a gift, and now you want to give it to Callum instead." She said it wasn't that simple. I said, "I need a day to think." That was not the response she expected. She expected me to say it was fine, or to argue, or to cry. I did none of those things. I said I needed a day, and I got off the phone, and I sat with the information for 24 hours like I had learned to do. What I understood by the end of that 24 hours was this: the pattern had not changed. The dynamic had not changed. I had changed. I had grown. I had built a life. I had become someone I was proud of, and none of that had moved her. The wedding had briefly made me a priority because weddings are visible, because there was social performance involved, because my mother cared about how things looked. But underneath that, the math was the same. When it came to resources and attention and effort, Callum was the answer and I was the remainder. I called her back the next evening. I said, "I understand that you need to help Callum, and I want you to know that I don't need your money. I haven't needed your money in a long time, and Mitch and I have handled everything ourselves." She started to say something warm, probably relief. I kept going. "What I need to tell you is that I have been carrying this dynamic my whole life, and I have been doing it quietly because I didn't want to cause problems. But I'm getting married in 2 months, and I have been thinking about who I want in that room, and I think the most honest thing I can do, for both of us, is to say clearly, the way things have been between us is not something I am willing to continue." Silence. I said, "I'm not asking you to explain yourself. I'm not asking you to apologize. I'm asking you to decide before you come to this wedding whether you want to actually be in a relationship with me. Not a performance of one, a real one. Because I am done doing all the labor of it by myself." She said, "You're being very harsh." I said, "I'm being very honest. There's a difference." She said she needed time to think about it. I said I understood. We did not talk for 6 weeks. 5 days before the wedding, she called. She talked for a long time. There was a version of an apology in there somewhere. Not a clean one, not the kind that names specific things and takes full responsibility, but the kind that a person gives when they have thought about something for weeks and have arrived at the edge of accountability, even if they haven't fully crossed it. She said she knew she hadn't always made me feel like a priority. She said she had told herself a lot of stories about why that was, and she wasn't sure anymore that any of those stories were true. She said she wanted to come to the wedding. I said, "I want you there." And I meant it. Not because everything was resolved, not because she had suddenly become the mother I had needed, but because I had said the thing I had needed to say, out loud, without softening it, and I had survived saying it, and now I could choose to include her from a place of genuine choice rather than obligation. She came to the wedding. She sat in the front row with my father, which took coordination and goodwill from everyone involved and somehow worked. She cried during the vows. She hugged me afterward in a way that felt different, less performed, more present. I don't know what she was feeling. I know what I felt. I felt like a person who had built something entirely on her own terms and who had invited her mother in anyway. Bernadette was there too. She wore a green dress and brought a gift that turned out to be a first edition of a book I had mentioned once, 8 months into our friendship, that I had always wanted to read. I don't know how she remembered that. I don't know how she found it. I held it in my hands and thought about the kind of attention it takes to remember a detail like that about another person. The kind of attention I had spent a lifetime not receiving from the people I expected it from, and finding it instead from the places I had not expected at all. When we danced, Mitch and I, our first dance, a song we had argued playfully about for 6 months before landing on something we both loved. I looked out at the people in that room and I thought about the version of me who had sat on the kitchen floor 3 years earlier. I thought about the 7 years and the plasma clinic and the sign my father made with a poster board marker. I thought about 2 empty chairs at a table that no one mentioned and a woman in a folding chair who had driven 20 minutes and said there she is. You spend so long looking for proof that you are worth showing up for. You look for it in the places that seem like they should provide it by default, by blood, by structure, by obligation. And sometimes those places come through and sometimes they don't, and neither outcome is the final answer about who you are or what you deserve. The final answer, if there is one, is something you build. It is the degree you finish when no one is tracking your progress. It is the job you take and the work you do, and the person you become without an audience. It is the guest list you make with honesty instead of obligation, and the conversation you have when you are finally done being quiet, and the moment when you look out at the people who chose to be there, really chose, not out of duty but out of something genuine, and you realize that the room is full. Not of the people you expected, of the right ones.